All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing one of the absolute most remarkable transformations in human history, the evolution of ancient Greek thought. We're going to look at how a society that was initially, well, completely obsessed with brutal physical dominance, warfare, and the mythological power of kings, somehow evolved into the birthplace of early psychology, rational philosophy, and democracy. It's an incredible journey from the bloody battlefield to the awakening of the rational mind. And honestly, it's absolutely fascinating.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand where Greek thought ended up, you kind of have to see where it started. Take a look at this quote from Homer's Iliad. It paints this vivid, really visceral picture of the ancient Bronze Age. It was a brutal reality. Men were literally left on the shores of Troy to just fight it out in sheer agony, relying entirely on their own physical strength and prowess. The gods had turned their backs. They essentially left human survival entirely up to the individual warrior's might. It was do or die, all on your own.
Now, what's really interesting about looking at these original texts is that long before any formal scientific observation, Homer's epic poetry served as the very first map of human psychology. It was these stories that captured the minds of the ancients. The Iliad documented the psychology of warfare and blinding rage, while the Odyssey detailed the broken-hearted wandering and the sheer uncertainty of a man just trying to find his way home. For them, this was the foundational understanding of human behavior.
So, to make sense of this epic shift, here is our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover 1. The heroic age. 2. Soul and anatomy. 3. The birth of the polis and phalanx. 4. Early psychology. 5. Golden Age democracy. And finally, 6. Socrates versus the Sophists. We've got a lot of amazing ground to cover, so let's get right to it. Section 1. The heroic age and ancient epics. Let's set the stage in the Bronze and Dark Ages. So we're talking roughly 3000 to 700 BC. This was an era strictly dominated by individual kings and warriors.
The core philosophy driving everything during this time was a concept called arete, which translates to excellence or virtue. But here's the catch. Early on, arete was absolutely not a moral or mental quality, not at all. It was a strictly physical achievement on the battlefield, and it was reserved exclusively for elite male warriors. If you were a woman, a child, enslaved, or poor, you were entirely excluded from this virtue. It wasn't until much later, when Hellenistic philosophies like Stoicism came around, that arete was completely redefined into a psychological state, an internal discipline of the mind, rather than, just securing a bloody victory with a sword.
Moving on to Section 2, the concept of the soul and anatomy. As their society developed, they naturally started getting curious about what actually animated the human body.
But their ancient views were incredibly different from our modern scientific understanding. Take the word psyche, for instance. Today, we translate that as soul, or we link it to psychology. But for the ancient Greeks, the psyche wasn't the controller of your personality or your behavior. It was quite literally the breath of life. It was just associated with being conscious and awake. When a person died, this breath physically left the body and traveled to Hades, the underworld. And once separated from the body, the psyche lost all physical and cognitive abilities. It couldn't think, it couldn't speak. This is exactly why proper burial rituals were absolutely vital to them. Without those rituals, that breath of life just couldn't find peace.
So, you're probably wondering, if the psyche wasn't controlling behavior, what on earth was? Well, the Greeks believed specific physical organs dictated specific behaviors. The phranes, which was located in the diaphragm, was thought to be responsible for rational planning and logic. Yeah, you heard that right. They literally thought you reasoned with your stomach muscles. Meanwhile, thymos, located in the heart, drove your emotions and feeling-based actions. The anatomical irony here is just wild. They completely ignored the brain as the center of thought, placing rationality in the diaphragm and emotion right there in the chest.
That brings us to Section 3, the birth of the polis and the phalanx. This is a massive turning point in how their society functioned.
Remember that hero age we just discussed? Everything revolved around this singular champion. If your army had an Achilles or a Hector, your side won. Society was an incredibly unlevel playing field, relying entirely on the genetic lottery of a few impossibly strong men just acting alone.
Let's move to the next point and see how this builds, because suddenly the Greeks invented the phalanx. This was a tight, deeply unified military formation of spear-armed infantry, and it was a real game changer. Suddenly, individual glory meant absolutely nothing. In a phalanx, your survival depended entirely on the guy standing to your left protecting you with his shield. This demanded extreme coordination and unity. And fascinatingly enough, this military shift bled directly into their politics and economics. The phalanx ethos fostered egalitarian values. It actively discouraged the excessive accumulation of wealth by any one individual, and it essentially gave birth to the polis, the collective city-state.
But, as you might guess, not all city-states evolved the exact same way. The two most famous ones, Sparta and Athens, took radically different paths. Sparta basically took that phalanx ethos to the extreme. They prioritized the state over the family, enforcing rigid, relentless military training right from childhood. Athens, on the flip side, leveraged this new collective mindset to birth democracy. They separated religion from governance and placed a massive focus on intellectual advancement, free thought, and the arts.
Section 4. Rational Mind and Early Psychology. In the fertile intellectual ground of Athens, a genuine awakening was happening.
Thinkers began to actively reject theocratic doctrines, where laws were just dictated by priests, and started relying on logic, observation, and early science. And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. Look at these early pioneers of the mind. Alcmaeon, through early dissection, finally figured out the eye-brain connection. He boldly stated that sensation and thought happen in the brain, not the heart. Then you have Empedocles, who argued that human understanding doesn't just come from pure logic, but through our physical senses acting as channels to the outside world. And then there's Democritus. He shockingly theorized that all matter is made of indivisible atoms, and get this, that our very thoughts and feelings are just the results of atomic movements in the brain. He was doing atomic theory thousands of years before modern physics. No way, right?
Section 5. The Golden Age and Democracy. All of this intense intellectual curiosity culminated right here.
Tracing the timeline, we see a really dramatic rise and fall. After miraculously defeating the massive Persian Empire in legendary battles like Marathon and Thermopylae, Athens entered its Golden Age from 479 to 431 BC. Under the leader Pericles, the Parthenon was built, and there was just this massive cultural explosion. Mathematicians like Pythagoras and medical pioneers like Hippocrates were absolutely thriving. But this peak was shattered by the devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta. That war weakened the Greek state so much that it opened the back door for Macedonia, led by Alexander the Great, to just sweep in and conquer them, spreading Greek culture globally as he went.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 6. Socrates confronts the Sophists. Right in the heart of Athens' democratic experiment, the ultimate intellectual showdown took place.
On one side, you had the Sophists. Figures like Protagoras famously argued that man is the measure of all things. They taught relativism, this idea that truth is subjective and depends entirely on your individual or cultural perspective. The Sophists were super practical. They trained the youth of Athens in rhetoric and persuasion, basically teaching them how to win arguments in the democratic courts, regardless of the actual facts. But on the exact opposite side was Socrates. Socrates firmly believed in absolute truth and moral goodness. He argued that evil only stems from ignorance. He relentlessly questioned people using what we now call the Socratic method, just peeling back the layers to strip away their false assumptions and expose the real truth.
But Socrates was uncompromising, and ultimately, it cost him his life. Even though he left behind absolutely no written works of his own, we literally only know him through his students, like Plato, his relentless questioning completely threatened the establishment. He openly criticized corrupt Athenian leaders and even rejected their specific form of democracy, arguing that only the truly wise should govern. And for this, the very democracy he critiqued put him on trial. He was condemned for corrupting the youth and for impiety against the gods. Given the choice of exile or execution, Socrates refused to compromise his principles. Actually, he doubled down, famously choosing to drink the poisonous hemlock rather than bend.
Socrates' tragic death leaves us with such a profound legacy. Just think about it. The ancient Greeks started with warriors fighting brutally on a beach, and within a few centuries, they had mapped the stars, discovered atoms, and built a working democracy. But looking back at that final clash between Socrates and the Sophists, we are left to ponder the very foundation of how we think today. Is truth an absolute, unwavering reality that we just have to uncover, or is it simply a matter of perspective shaped by whoever happens to have the most persuasive voice in the room? It's a question they literally died for, and honestly, it's one we're still trying to answer today.